Well, hello, everybody. I'm Steve Pollock, president of Japan Society of Northern California, and welcome to this evening's program. We're very excited to present to you with Steve Beimel and JapanCraft21 about Japanese Urushi Lacquerware. This is actually the fifth program in our series of programs on traditional arts and crafts in Japan, together with JapanCraft21 and Steve. And I'm very excited to say that our programs with Steve have been our highest rated and best attended programs consistently every time we do one with him. And so I'm sure tonight's program will be equally entertaining and enlightening for our audience. And thank you everybody for joining us today. Today's program is actually put on by Japan Society of Northern California, but we have a number of partners who have also helped to promote our program and invited their members to attend, including Japan Society of Colorado, Japan America Society of Washington, D.C., Japan America Society of Oregon, Japan America Society of Hawaii. And we want to thank all of your members for joining us today for today's program. So many of you probably already know Steve Beimel and the work of JapanCraft21. They are an organization that was founded in the interest of preserving Japan's traditional crafts and craftspeople, supporting Japanese craftspeople pursuing arts that are found nowhere else in the world in many cases, and certainly a skill level that is unrivaled in any other place in the world. It's also something that really makes Japan distinctive and brings many of us to love the country and its traditions. And so we're very excited to have him tell us about that. He'll also tell us a little bit more about the work they are doing to preserve traditional Japanese crafts in Japan and support Japanese craftspeople. And I hope that you will consider supporting his work with his organization. But before I do, let me just mention briefly that Japan Society of Northern California does a lot of programming ourselves. This is one area of strong interest among our members, but we do a lot of other things. In fact, we just returned from a week in Japan where we had a very large healthcare conference organized in Tokyo and Osaka. We also had a big innovation reception at the U.S. Embassy, the Deputy Chief of Missions residence in Tokyo, which was a very nice event. And we have some things coming up. In particular, I want to mention our annual Award of Honor Gala, which will take place on October 24th. For those of you in the Bay Area or coming to the Bay Area, you may want to consider joining us there. It'll be a really fun evening. It's also our major fundraiser of the year. So it's our chance to generate support that helps us bring programs like this to you throughout the year. And you can find tickets available and information about the event on our website. And then immediately afterwards on October 27th, which is a Monday, we have a very special event. It's a live screening and director talk with Emma Yamazaki, who some of you may know was nominated for an Academy Award in the short documentary category for film last year. And this is the longer film from which that short was taken. And the title of the film is The Making of a Japanese. And it looks at in depth at Japanese school children in elementary school in 2020 in Japan, and does a wonderful job portraying the Japanese educational system. So we will do a screening for that here in the Bay Area in Mountain View, and then that will be followed by a live director talk with Emma immediately following the film. And for those of you who are not here in the Bay Area, you can watch the film video on demand prior to the event, and then join a Zoom for the discussion with Emma immediately following the event. So I want to encourage you to participate in that. We have other programs coming up in November, including actually a repeat visit from Jake Adelstein, who some of you may know as the author and subject of a series that was a popular television series on HBO, but which was based on his memoir, Tokyo Vice. He is coming to talk to us about his new book, about The Devil Takes Bitcoin, and he will talk to us on November 6th here in the Bay Area. So let me now turn it over to Steve, and he will tell us about the wonderful world of Japanese Urushi Lacquerware and explain its origins and some of the artisans practicing that craft today. So Steve, thank you for joining us, and please share your thoughts about Japanese lacquerware.
Thank you, Steve, and thanks for the opportunity to share what I call Japan's unintentionally best kept secret, which is urushi, often referred to as erroneously as lacquer. Urushi is the most natural, most luxurious, most elegant, the deepest, smoothest, purest, most durable coating in the world for the past 9,000 years. This is pure Urushi being dripped down a screen. And it's a video by one of our JapanCraft21 craft leaders, a group called Edit, and headed by Yoko Toda and Yuki Kajikawa. So if you could see here, in this temple, everything below this railing here is a wood surface covered with urushi. Urushi is such a magnificent material. And I hope by the end of this presentation today, you will have a greater understanding of what this is all about. So we are JapanCraft21, revitalizing crafts for the 21st century. And in addition to preserving crafts, we are seeking to save crafts. There are 1,100 and crafts genres in Japan, and the number keeps growing. And we are working to save as many as we can. Urushi itself has been used in Japan for 9,000 years, in China for 5,000 years. And the urushi that we see nowadays, this high craft urushi, actually came from China. Some of the techniques came from China in about the 700s, during the China's Tang Dynasty and Japan's Nara period. So you've heard of the word lacquer and you've heard the word shellac. Lacquer is actually a resin from lac insects. It's an Indian style of methodology. It's a coating that's used, for some reason, Japanese urushi has been called lacquer all these years, and that again that is a misnomer. So Indian production is really started picking up about 400 years ago. Shellac is that same lac resin, but mixed with alcohol. You've heard also of Japanning. This is something that from about the late 1500s, when Japanese lacquerware was what's called lacquerware, urushiware, was exported to Europe, the royalty, aristocratic families really went crazy over what they saw, and they wanted to have the same thing. Unfortunately, the urushi resin was not available in Europe, so they began to come up with various different concoctions which simulated it, and it's called Japanning, but Japanning is not urushi. When they coat it with metal, they use asphaltum, which is the same ingredient for making asphalt. For wood coating, they use shellac, and gesso, which is animal glue mixed with some pigments. So the cost of urushi is extraordinary. Most people, when you think of lacquer, you think of something you can get at Home Depot. The equivalent of, let's say, 6 ounces would be about $2.50. And the same amount in Japan would be between $200 and $300 using the 2004 dollar rate. It's also available from China, and 96% of Japanese urushi comes from China, and Chinese lacquer, urushi lacquer, is much less expensive. It's about $50 for the same amount. And so many artists and craftspeople will use Chinese lacquer urushi for the bottom coats, and then use the Japanese urushi for the top coat. It's the same, comes from the same tree, so it's about the same thing. So urushi is grown mostly in Iwate Prefecture in northern Japan. It's all around Japan, but mostly Iwate. And it's harvested from the trees, and one tree produces about 6 ounces in its lifetime. So one 12 to 15-year-old tree produces 6 ounces, then it's cut down and replanted. And so it's really a precious commodity, and every drop is very carefully collected. Nothing is wasted, and of course, every grove of urushi trees is slightly different, and sometimes they're vastly different. And so each of these buckets, this is in a dealer, in an urushi dealer in Kyoto, who's also one of our JapanCraft21 contest winners. Each bucket contains urushi from a certain grove. And after they receive it, they do scrupulous testing, and they test for, let's say, speed of drying, or viscosity, or is it good for outdoors, or is it good for indoor use, clarity, et cetera. Then the raw urushi is poured into a bucket, and this is what it looks like. So inside you see insects and water and sawdust and plant fibers. So to remove that, they pour it into a centrifugal force device with cotton, with plain cotton. And they spin it around, and all the impurities and the cotton go to the outside of the device. And then it's removed, and what's left over is the pure urushi. Then that's poured into another device for the stirring process. It's stirred all day long, a full day. And overhead, there are lamps, heat lamps, which help to evaporate some of the water in the urushi, and this improves and adjusts the viscosity. Then they let it sit for a few days. Then it's tested again for glossiness, viscosity, degree of clarity. The drying time is very important. Does it dry fast? Does it dry slow? This will inform the process in which it's used, suitability for indoor and outdoor use. And meticulous records are kept. And what they do is an artist or a craftsperson will contact the dealer, and they'll say, well, I want something that dries fast in the winter. I want it to be kind of murky. I want it to have great viscosity, and on. And I want it to be this soda blue. So they will create a bespoke blend just for that person, and they will give it to them in the amount that they wish. This is a comb that's 7,200 years old, that just a wooden comb that was coated with urushi. And a basket, normally a basket's usually made of grasses or bamboo, and it may last a couple hundred years before it starts to fall apart. This is a 3,000-year-old basket. Because it was coated with urushi, it's still intact today. So several kinds of substrates. Actually, urushi could be put on almost anything. Actually, anything. You could put on plastic. You could put it on glass. You could put it on paper. But the main substrates are wood, metal, or hollow. And when I speak about the hollow, this is a technique, kanshitsu, or dry urushi technique. This goes back in Japan about 1,300 years, when Buddhist statues were made using dry urushi technique. And what they do is they make a model, and then they cover the model with strips of urushi-infused hemp cloth, layer upon layer upon layer upon layer. And then they remove the model so it becomes hollow, and then they do shaping of the statue. So this creates an extremely strong statue, very durable and very lightweight. So this technique just died out for about 1,000 years, and it was reintroduced about 100 years ago. And so you'll see this kind of work being done with dry urushi, and we'll show you some artists who are working with that right now. Here's another piece, and this is about 3 feet wide. This is a bowl, 3 feet wide bowl made with dry urushi, and it weighs almost nothing. It's so lightweight, and the gloss is extraordinary, as you can see. the gloss is so beautiful. It's like looking in a mirror. In fact, it's actually nicer than a mirror. It's more flattering than a mirror. So there are many techniques which came from China, and there are many techniques which were developed by the Japanese. And this choshitsu is a Chinese import where they'll put up to 100 layers of urushi over a wood base, and then they carve back the piece. So it'd be 100 layers of vermilion urushi. And this would be 100 layers of black urushi on the right side. Horinuri is a Japanese technique where instead of having 100 layers of urushi, which is very expensive, since each tree only produces 6 ounces, they carve wood first to make the shape, and then they put a few coats of urushi on it, and it looks the same. So this is called Kamakura Bori. This is one of the famous urushi centers of Japan. There are about 45 centers around Japan that each one doing urushi in their own way. The black is placed on first, and then the vermilion over it, and then the vermilion is rubbed back so you can start to see the black through the vermilion, and it gives it a very deep coloring. Another area that does this is near Nikko. They do the same thing. This is carved multi-layered of colored urushi. So you have many, in this case, they'll have 3 colors. They'll have that creamy color, they'll have green, and they'll have the pink. This is a Chinese piece. And it's carved back to expose the different colors. So you'll have the background, you have the green vines, and you'll have the green stems, and you'll have the pinkish plum flowers. Again, here it's being carved back. This is a contemporary piece, and as you carve back each layer, in places you can see the different colored layers. This would be a contemporary Chosai piece. Polished out urushi, polished out burnished urushi. So before I go into that, I just want to show you when I speak about the base coats, before any of these processes, which I'm going to explain to you now, before any of them can be done, they have to create the base. So there are 45 in this piece, 45 steps to get to this very deep, shiny black at the bottom. It's applied, it's polished back, it's applied, it's polished back over and over and over. And then at that point, they can start doing these rarefied techniques. So when I say they have a base coat, you'll know what I mean. This is a burnishing technique where they begin with 48 layers, as I just said, and they put blobs of colored urushi on the surface of that. And then they put urushi over it to make it flat, several layers, and then they start polishing it back. And this is what it looks like when it's polished back. This is done in Aomori Prefecture. Chinking is a technique where you have your 40 or so, it could be between 20 and 40 base coats. Then the final coat is very highly polished urushi, and then you make incisions. You incise these lines, and you fill it with gold powder, and then bind it with more urushi as an adhesive. Kinma involves cutting lines, dots, or a combination of the two into dry, hard urushi with a special carving blade. So you can see how here, this is an artist, Kaori Sugano, and she very nicely provided this online. So I thought it was a perfect way to describe it. So you see that you have the base, then you cut in to the base, and then you fill it with urushi, and then it looks like what you see on the right side. Rankaku is a unique Japanese technique. It involves embedding crushed quail eggs, shells, into the surface of the urushi to create intricate patterns. Many people aren't aware that there is a small but very significant group of collectors around the world who collect Japanese high-end fountain pens. So these fountain pens are some of the most highly prized and most complex pieces of craftsmanship with many, many different urushi techniques used. And so you could see, and they cost about, $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 a piece, but there are significant collectors. So that you can see these white pieces here are the quail egg, which were embedded. Mother of pearl is well known. It's Chinese and Korean technique. It involves inlaying thin pieces of iridescent shell, like abalone or pearl oyster, into the urushi surface and creating shimmering designs. You can see here, the urushi is holding hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of very thinly sliced seashell. Hiramakie, this would be applying gold to the surface of the already completed base. So you could see what they will do is they'll take a very fine brush, and with clear urushi, they will paint the design, and then they'll take urushi. So after they have that, while the urushi is still wet, they sprinkle on gold dust, and then they polish this, and that would be the base technique. Now, many artists will just do or craftspeople will just do this technique, but there are other techniques where you can, for example, with these fountain pens, you'll see the technique we just saw, the single layer, but then you'll put layer upon layer upon layer upon layer of urushi over it, and then you'll polish it down so the gold will seem to be very deep into the pen itself. Very deep, glossy, gorgeous picture. Takamakie is where you raise the gold surface. So you raise the surface of the gold. You could use metal, you could use some kinds of powders, and then over that you place the gold. And so it's raised. It has a relief feel to it. So that you could see that all of the flower portions are raised above the surface. It's a very complex piece. This raised amber, so you take the process that I just showed you, and then you put many, many, many layers of urushi above that, and then you can polish back and sand back to have the three-dimensional effect. This is the most difficult one of all to achieve. Hyomon deals with the placing of metal onto the surface of the already completed base. It could be little sheets of gold, silver, or tin in these intricate patterns. And you can see here, in addition to the metal, you'll see these flowers have its mother of pearl inlay. Many of you are familiar with the irises at Yatsuhashi. It's early 18th century, about the early 1700s, by Ogata Korin, one of the most famous Japanese paintings in the world. It's in the Metropolitan in New York. Also, by the same artist, he created a three-dimensional painting in urushi, and where the gold is the gold technique I just described. The flowers, the iris flowers, are mother of pearl, and the zigzag bridge is placed in lead on the surface. This was made in about 1710. This is one of the great treasures of craftsmanship in the world. Urushi A is painterly decorative technique using colored urushi. This is a box used for presenting sweets in a tea event. So most Japanese art forms begin with painting an outline of a design, and then the color is filled in. And you'll see this in the work of, for example, Kano Eitoku. Many of the most famous paintings from the 1700s will use this technique, and onwards. Woodblock prints use this technique. They make the shape, they fill in the color after. Illustrated books, overglazed enamels in ceramics does this. Nihonga paintings and Yuzen kimono, they all use the same technique, and even manga and anime will use the same technique. So Zonsei came from China, and they use the same technique in that, but instead of just drawing around the flower or the leaf, they do an incision, and it's engraved with color or gold to make it a very strong contrast, to really make it stand out. And this is a contemporary piece, and this is an example of how 5 or 6 of the things I just described can be in one piece. So this is dry lacquer. This is a box with dry lacquer, and the dragonflies are the metal which is affixed to the surface, the gold. The spider web is from making incisions and putting in gold powder. At the bottom, all these tiny specks are bits of seashell, and all these dots are the sprinkling of the gold. So you can have either high gloss or matte. So this is an example of the high gloss. It's this mirror-like finish. So they use a special charcoal or special stones or other fine abrasives to do the polishing. Sometimes they'll use paulownia or tung wood charcoal, and they apply the urushi, they polish it, they apply it, they polish it, they apply it, and they polish it over and over and over, and they get these, it's very time-consuming, they get these stunning surfaces. In the matte, the last application is not polished. So what you're seeing is the natural way the urushi looks when it dries. So I thought, what do I know? But I thought that, oh, this must be much easier. But actually, this is much more difficult than doing all the polishing, because every speck of dust, every brush mark, which normally could be polished out in the polishing process, can't be done here. So it has to be perfectly applied, or it has to be done over. So we were introducing us to 10 superstars plus one of our craft leaders who is on his way to be a superstar. And there are about 45 different, as I mentioned, 45 different urushi centers in Japan. There are 3 areas where most of the artists live. This is not 100%, but most of them are either in Kanazawa, Kyoto, or Tokyo. And half of our people today do functional work. JapanCraft21 supports functional crafts. We feel this is Japan's strongest suit, but we have included some non-functional work just so you could see and understand how extraordinary urushi is, with more examples. So these are our 11 people, and you'll see their names coming up as we go through. Terumasa Ikeda, he's in his late 30s. He lives in Kanazawa, and he's taken urushi into the 21st century. He's become a superstar. He's developed all kinds of variations of universal symbols, of Arabic numbers, electronic parts, images, random patterns, abstract forms, and they all glow in this wonderful spectrum against the black background. All of his works are functional, for use mostly for storing of tea or storing of incense, not for burning incense, but for storing incense. So this would be an incense holder, as is this. So the colors are all mother of pearl, seashell, embedded in the black urushi. His shapes are either conventional or unconventional. Chie Aoki lives and works in Kanazawa. She is in her early 40s, and her works are between 3 to 5 feet tall. So there are 2 kinds of black in urushi. There's translucent black, which is created through the use of iron, and there's opaque black, which is achieved through pine soot. So these are all iron-induced translucent black figures. And these are all hollow figures using the dry urushi technique. So she begins making a shape in styrofoam. Styrofoam seems to be the most popular substrate, which pattern model, which is, of course, removed. And then so she makes it in styrofoam. She soaks hemp in urushi and covers the piece over and over and over again. Then the styrofoam is removed, and then the polishing process begins. It's very lightweight. There are 30 production steps that go into making this to create a mirror-like luster. And this is, of course, her human body series. Urushi artists in Kanazawa and Wajima area, most of them rely on an almost extinct technique. There's only one person left that can make the charcoal that they prefer. and it's made by a man in his 70s, and he's the last person making it. It's a 3-year process, and there's always a waiting list for getting it. So we're wondering what's going to happen when he retires, but it's essential for the especially in Wajima, the lacquer area near Kanazawa. Nobuyuki Tanaka he's very, very well known. He's maybe one of the senior artists in the Urushi world in Japan. He's in his mid-60s, and he's also working in Kanazawa. He also uses the high gloss lacquer, Urushi lacquer, with a styrofoam mold, which is removed. I keep mentioning lacquer because we're trying to give some familiarity to people. When we mention just Urushi, it's very difficult for people to grasp it. So we often say Urushi lacquer. So he's more than taller than average height. So you can see that this is a very big piece. He uses, of course, a special charcoal, and that polishing, he feels that this particular charcoal gives it an extra depth in its gloss. It seems like people, when they look at this, they see their own reflection. It's so deep and it's so reflective. They see their own reflection, so they're drawn into the work. It's a very unique experience. His works are in the Metropolitan in New York. He will put vermilion over the black and then polish that back to reveal much of the black, but it's a very rich, very evocative combination. And it makes the vermilion look very much deeper. Fumie Sasai is in her early 50s. She works in Kyoto, and she's known around the world in certain circles, but generally speaking, people don't really understand or know anything about Urushi in most of the world. Her works are mostly 1 to 2 feet in size, and she works with dry Urushi, and she also uses styrofoam. And most of her works have a matte finish, or she uses a combination of the two for contrasting. She started out working in ceramics, and she didn't like the fact that the ceramics shrink with drying and shrink with firing. She didn't like it getting smaller, but so she moved to Urushi because it keeps getting bigger and bigger, even though not that much bigger. Here's a combination of matte and gloss. So she will paste the hemp cloth onto the mold, or she will use thin washi paper infused with the Urushi lacquer. And she'll also use powdered burnt clay on some of the undercoats. Like many of her colleagues, she teaches in a university, teaches Urushi. Takeshi Igawa is in his mid-40s, and he works in a university near Kobe. And his sizes vary from about 1 to 3 feet. He uses the dry Urushi technique. And he makes molds not using styrofoam, but he uses a mixture of Urushi, sawdust, powdered clay stone, and other materials. And to quote the artist, "The mold is very important, and I spend a great deal of time perfecting the carved shape." He uses palm leaves for the shapes of many of his molds. So when you stare at them, you'll think you're looking at black glass. The palm leaves give a shape that's reminiscent of the sea, of waves, so his work is often associated with the sea. Again, paper light, it's light as a feather. I often use the word artist, and I also use the word craftsperson. So we make a distinction just to keep things clear. We made a distinction between artists and craftspeople. An artist we define as someone who makes one-of-a-kind pieces or very limited editions, and craftspeople who make things in much larger numbers. So master artist craftspeople are making things for a few people at high prices, and the master artisan craftspeople are making things for a lot of people at more affordable prices. And the artists tend to make fewer pieces per year, fewer styles per year, but they may spend 3 months on one design. And their influence on the craftspeople is really great because they introduce a lot of new ideas. So JapanCraft21, it's time for our commercial. We are working to support the crafts of Japan. If you take most of the master crafts of the world, when I say master crafts, I mean things that take 7 to 10 years to learn how to master the craft, and crafts that have been passed on for hundreds and sometimes over 1,000 years. If you take most of those from around the world, like Stradivarius violins and things like that, on the right side of this scale, you'll find that Japan has arguably more than most of the world combined. However, since 1979, the numbers of craftspeople has decreased from about 300,000 1979 to what we expect to be about 20,000 in 3 years from now. There are about 50,000 now, and about half of them are ready to retire, and they have no one to take over their craft. There are 1,100 crafts that we have identified through our research program. So our mission is to identify problems, create strategies, to take actions. And we created several years ago a school where we train young carpenters, working carpenters, how to do the lost art of joinery. Lost joinery is pretty much a lost art now, except for mostly older carpenters. So some of these people here are our students, and the other people are our supporters. The classes are free of charge, and we've already graduated 12 carpenters, and we have 5 right now taking the course. So we will have graduated, taken a total of 17 working carpenters who had no idea how to do joinery up to the master level through these intense classes held on Sundays. We just completed the first authentic Japanese Kyoto machiya in Kyoto, the first building like this to be built 90 years with no nails at all. We have a program where we support textile silk dyeing. So we have 5 apprentices. We pay for their room and board, while these apprentices study full-time with 10 master dyers in their 70s, 80s, and 90s, some of the oldest and the most, let's say, some of the most rarefied techniques that we are able to save through this program. We have a program now where we have an apprentice we're supporting in the forging not only knives, but culinary knives. So not only these scissors, but culinary knives. This is our new apprentice. He's 26 years old. Forgive what he's wearing. He was just cleaning out a very dirty old place for a new workshop they're making. 26 years old, very enthusiastic to be a culinary knife maker. We have a new apprentice in furniture making who we're supporting. And we have hopefully another one coming up soon. This is furniture made only with Japanese planes. There's no sandpaper done at all. One way that you could all help us, very simply, we are trying to make our name known. And it's a difficult, very competitive world out there to become known. So if you could go on to Instagram and just follow and like us, that would help us a lot. That just one little thing will help us it strengthens our platform. It's taken us a few years to get 2,000 followers, and we want to have at least 10,000, because that's kind of a magic number. If you get 10,000, then it gives you a certain credibility. So please go on to Instagram and like and follow us. And if you would like to join JapanCraft21, you can do that for as little as $100 or more. And be part of a very active group trying to save these master crafts for our world civilization. This is for everyone. It's not just for the Japanese, it's for our world civilization. Now, back to the show. Genta Ishizuka works in Kyoto, and he's in his early 40s. He's in the Metropolitan Institute. Excuse me, he's in the Minneapolis Institute of Art, which is one of the great Asian art museums in Japan. He's also in the Victoria and Albert Museum. He won the very prestigious Low Foundation Prize about 6 years ago. He works in both dry and conventional urushi. So to quote him, "First I packed styrofoam spheres into a bag made of elastic cloth to create a prototype. Then I paste hemp cloth on top and repeatedly apply layers of urushi to create a surface expression. Then I polish it back to make glossy urushi. And the spheres that extrude through the cloth create the tension on the surface." So, of course, everything that's inside is removed. So these are hollow, lightweight, durable pieces. Toru Tsuji is one of our craft leaders. He is not yet a superstar. He's in his mid-50s, and he works in Ibaraki Prefecture. He's unusual because he does the entire process, from planting seedlings to raising urushi trees, extracting the sap, processing the sap into a usable resin, and then creating his own wooden substructures, carving them. This is a pattern of the indigenous Ainu people of Japan. And then this silver effect, this silvery metallic effect, is his own concoction of taking tin powder and mixing it with urushi and coating it to make this wonderful metallic surface. He also works with clear urushi and does a lot of inlay work. Very, very talented person. And he's looking for an apprentice now. So if you know anyone, they need to speak Japanese and be committed to living in Japan for the rest of their life. But that's we are looking for someone right now. Toru Matsuzaki works in Mashiko, the famous ceramics area, and he's about 80 years old, and he uses wooden base. So his work has a very like a minge or folk feel. It's very different from the highly polished, perfect pieces that you often associate with urushi ware. All his works are functional. He begins with basic forms, and he carves them out of valuable wood such as zelkova or chestnut, using chisels and planes. The base coats are black, and then he covers it with the vermilion, then polishes it back to allow some of the black to show through. It's beautiful work for displaying food. At the really young age of 60, he's worked in Wajima near Kanazawa. He's considered probably one of the greatest artists of the 21st century working in urushi. He works in the Victoria and Albert Museum, as other places. He works with wooden bases, and he also collaborated with people like Chiku Unsai, the famous bamboo artist who makes these great basket-like installations in museum lobbies all over the world. Also with our contest judge, Sawako Kaijima. She's an artist, a designer, a former professor at Harvard. And the three of them collaborated on some projects. So here you'll see the metal leaves, which are appliqued over the substrate. And inside it's this very high gloss urushi, which is where the gold has been covered with urushi many layers and burnished back. Then around the edge, you'll see the use of the quail eggs. Here in this beetle, you'll see the use of the raised gold method of makie and mother of pearl. This is an extraordinary traditional piece, an incense burner with the raised gold techniques and the quail egg at the bottom, quail egg technique. This is an amazing piece. It's a replica of one of the most famous bowls in Japan. It's a bowl from the Southern Song Dynasty from the 1200s in China, Tenmoku oil spot bowl, and he made it out of urushi, and it weighs nothing. So when I picked it up thinking it was going to weigh something, be a little heavy like ceramics, it was very counterintuitive. It just came up like a feather. Very broad, a broad field of work. He could do just about anything. And he was trying to keep those techniques alive by expanding into many different urushi forms. Kazumi Murose is a living national treasure of urushi. He's 70 years old and he lives in Tokyo, works on a wood base. And his specialty is makie, the gold on the gold powder on the surface. Here you have the gold foliage of the plant at the bottom of plant material, which is covered with many layers of urushi and then burnished back, so it looks very deep into the piece. The birds are mother of pearl, and those tiny dots are silver, called silver mist. Combination of the urushi and the inlay. This would be gold, the gold makie technique, and in rectangles surrounded by inlaid mother of pearl. He spends about 2 years making just the base. Of course, he could do other work at the same time, but with urushi, it has a very long drying time between coats. So he could do many works at the same time. He makes about 8 pieces a year total, finishes. Here, this would be the combination of the makie gold on 3 surfaces, and on 2 surfaces, he has this inlaid mother of pearl. Well, thank you. Thank you for your patience. I hope you are inspired by the mastery of Japanese urushi, and I'm giving this back to Steve.
Wow, Steve, thank you so much for that tour of Urushi Lacquerware and some of the techniques and history of this art. I wanted to ask you just a little bit more about some of the aspects of, kind of the creative process. And, one of the things that struck me as I was preparing for today's talk and your presentation is, you talk about this comes from the sap of a sumac tree, the urushi tree. And I discovered that it's also related to species like poison ivy and poison oak. And so
And poison sumac.
Yes, and poison sumac. And so I was wondering if you can talk a little bit about whether the sap kind of provokes the same sort of rash when people touch it, and how that affects artisans working in this craft, or preparing the sap for use by artisans.
It is the same, basically the same subspecies, and it is extremely has very high allergic properties. It takes a person learning how to do urushi, an apprentice, usually takes about 6 months to build up resistance. They will break out in a rash. And even people who have been doing it for a lifetime will say that if they're really tired, sometimes they'll break out in a little bit of a rash. But about 6 months, and then they can move on. But it's, it's a wonder why people would want to do this. First of all, it takes 1 billion hours to make these things. And and you'll say people from the West will come, they'll see a piece that costs, let's say $1,000, and they say $1,000 for that. And then when you figure out the number of hours that it took to do that to make it, they're not even making minimum wage. So it's one of the most underrated, understood, misunderstood forms in the world, I think.
And undercompensated, it sounds like.
Undercompensated, and you've got to get rashes as well.
Yeah, right. And so can you talk a little bit about what the process is, especially, when you go from a wood piece that forms kind of the base or the shape maybe, or another material is used, and then gets covered, and then the inlaying of eggshell or mother of pearl or other items, gold foil or other things into that. How does that actually work? And what is the polishing, process and technique that takes place for that?
Well, there are 45 different centers of Urushi, and everyone seems to have their own variation. There are many similarities, and maybe it's 90% the same, but there are some differences. And it's basically the number of subcoats will vary from form to form, person to person. But when you just getting the urushi to stick to the wood is a very difficult process. You want it to stick so it'll stay stuck to it. Otherwise, how if you put paint or commercial lacquer on things, it peels after a while. But to avoid the peeling, it's a very important process of preparing the wood. And they use things like deer horn powder mixed with urushi. They'll mix a little bit of mud, river mud, with urushi, and they'll keep rubbing it and rubbing it, and they'll put on a coat of something, put a coat of that. Then they'll rub most of that off, and then they'll put more urushi on, and they'll rub most of that off, and they'll put more urushi on, and they'll do this up to 40 times till you get that black sub level. And as I said, some forms may only do it 10 times. And if you're selling a piece for $10,000, you have the luxury of doing it 40 times. But if you're selling a piece for $50, you don't have that luxury. But still, it's a very arduous process, even for the $50 piece. And
So how long would it take to
so
create one piece like that? I mean,
So,
would it be
and then the
months?
drying process is, the
Mhm.
only word, in 2025, people will say insane. And I think it's insane. So you'll have just people making bowls for everyday use. It takes a full day. The final coat has to be perfect. Any speck of dust on it has to be removed with a crow's feather. They have a special drying chamber. You have to have a certain amount of humidity. If it's too dry or the temperature is too high or too low, it will have difficult drying. So they have drying chambers where they keep the humidity up by placing wet towels in the chamber. And then they put they'll take, let's say you have 10 bowls that you want to dry. So you'll take a plunger type device, and you'll stick it like a rubber device on the bottom of it. And then you put the urushi on the top. So you have all these 10 bowls that are all, the bottom is facing up, and it's connected to a board, and you put it in a drying chamber. And then 10 minutes later, 5 to 10 minutes later, you turn it upside down, because if you don't, then it'll drip. So 10 minutes later, you put it upside, and then you put it right side up, but then you put the inside out and the outside in, because the humidity is different at the front of the chamber to the back of the chamber. And then the next time you do it 10 minutes later, you put it at the bottom of the chamber, because the humidity is different down there. You put it upside down and downside up. You'll do this for 9 hours.
Mhm.
And the last coat, usually a person they'll strip to the waist, or if it's a woman, as much as she can. And because you don't want any dust at all. And any dust that appears, you take this crow's feather and you just pluck it off. And if there's any ripple or any bump in there, it can't be used. You have to start over.
Hmm.
So it's why anyone would want to do this, I don't know, but why anyone wouldn't want to have it is I don't know that either because it's so precious. And
So,
I just described maybe 1%, and the other 99% we would need several hours to discuss of your question, but I think that gives you an idea.
so kind of coming from a similar place, when you did your presentation on textiles, you talked a lot about all the different stages of production from, cultivating the silkworms to creating the fibers to dyeing the fibers to different stitching techniques to stitching to dyeing different kinds of dyeing techniques both in the cloth form and then in the decoration once it's been sewed. It strikes me that just kind of from your presentation, it looks like there are similar multiple stages in the production process of lacquerware, from cultivating the trees and tapping the trees and collecting the sap and then refining the sap and then adding the color and the pigments and then marketing that and then working with it in different media. Can you talk just a little bit about, are there specialists in each of these areas, and how do they
There
work
are
with each other?
absolutely there are people who specialize in as growers. There are people, and the growers will do the collection. Then the urushi is sent to one center, a dealer, and most of those techniques that I was showing you was done in one place. The preparation from the raw urushi down to the finished product in the tube, that's done in one place. And then the urushi craftsperson or artist will take that material, and according to their own specialty, they will apply that. And so all the specialties I'm showing, there are very few people that can do more than a couple of those. Most people are just doing one specialty. It takes many years just to learn how to do one of those things, and to have several under one's belt is rare. So each person does what they do according to their own training, their own creativity, because the techniques are always adjusting and evolving over time.
So you talked a little bit about, kind of functional items versus artwork. Several of the artists that you profiled, seem to me to clearly fall more in the category of artisans, artists,
Yes,
sculptors,
artists.
people creating work for art's sake. Whereas, traditionally, when I think of, my experience with urushi in Japan, I think of chopsticks, or I think of bowls, or I think of, really fancy, inlaid boxes in a museum that were used by royalty for some particular household purpose. Can you talk a little bit about, the art of urushi today? And are there still people, making functional items, or has, the market moved more towards artists who are working in the medium?
Um, so the majority of the work is being done by artisans,
Mhm.
and we chose to show artists so you could see the full depth and breadth of the technique, to see what is possible. There are 40, I think I mentioned 45 centers where they're doing urushi for as functional wear around Japan. And yes, they're still doing it today. The sales have dropped about 50% in the last 20, 30 years. So and for many, many reasons, markets changed, and um, you know, urushi craftspeople working in a small town don't have the wherewithal to market in competition for companies who are making things, manufacturing things with great ad campaigns. So it's been very challenging. That's why we're stepping in to try and bring attention to this. But yes, it's still being done, and the markets are dropping out pretty quickly. But they're still there.
Great. Well, I see that we actually have had quite a few questions come up in the chat. And so what I'd like to do is actually open it now to, people who've attended our program, and see if they would like to ask some things about, the presentation and the art of Urushi. And maybe we can, start with some questions from the chat. So um, I'll try to see if we still have enough people online who have asked a question to be able to introduce them and have them ask you. So if I call on you, uh, turn on your mic and then ask the question to Steve. So I think Philip Crump asked a question about the coat. And do you want to ask that, Philip, or your question about?
Sure.
Yeah,
Yes.
thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Hi, Steve. Thank you, as always, for just an amazing, rich experience for all of us. So my question, I mean, you talk about sometimes, 45 base layers
Yes.
of urushi, and understanding that the characteristics of each urushi vary so much. But how long would that take? How long does it take? What does it take to dry each layer? And so to produce 45 base layers.
It takes a long time. So artists or craftspeople will work on multiple pieces simultaneously. It takes, it could take a few months to produce a piece, even a fairly a fairly simple piece. It could take a few months.
Great. Thank you.
Great. Well, I see we also have a question from Beverly Spears. So Beverly, are you still on the call? And do you want to ask your question?
Yes, I'm still here. And I was just so curious that this technique is 7,000 years old. And I just think it's, I would love to know how people discovered that you could use sap in this way in the first place, but maybe that's maybe that's impossible to know.
Uh, yes, Urushi in the Jomon period, which is 12,000 to about 2,200 years ago. During that period, Urushi was considered, because of its protective qualities, was considered a very spiritual substance where you could protect things. You can things become sacred when they're coated with Urushi. So it has a very long history within the, let's say, the pre-Chinese influenced world of Japan.
That's fascinating.
Good to see
Well,
you
going
again.
Thank you.
sort of the roots of Urushi to a more contemporary question, it looks like Marcia Cohen had a question about some of the techniques used for the artisans that you mentioned. Marcia, are you still online?
Yes. How did the artisans remove the styrofoam interior or whatever interior material was used?
That's a
Thank
great question. I think each artist has their own strategy depending on the shape. It's with styrofoam, it's you don't need to have a big orifice to remove it because you can cut it and you could kind of scoop it out. So that's probably, I'm guessing they have a hole someplace where they can scoop it out.
Thank you. Great presentation.
Thank you.
And just to follow up on the styrofoam question again, Steve. So styrofoam, is that the most common item? I mean, I really think of this as wood for kind of the base, but it sounds like a lot of these people who are doing more artistic kinds of renderings are using styrofoam because it's so much more flexible in terms of how they prepare it. Is that
Well,
why they're using that?
remember, the mainstream urushi is done on wood.
Mhm.
Most of it's done on wood. A few artists are pushing the envelope and making quite a bit of headway using dry lacquer technique, which is mostly for art. And so these people, because it's with dry urushi, you need a model around, or a form around which to create your piece. Styrofoam is just the most practical. It's just the easiest to work with. Not that they don't all use that, but and dry urushi is not even in Japan. Lots of people have never heard of it. It's not that common of a thing. I mean, it's a very important aspect of urushi, but the public has not caught up with knowledge of it. So it's important, but it's not as big as the wood substrate, which you're aware of and familiar with, rightly so.
Steve, we had a question from Danielle Capalba. Are you still online, Danielle? And do you want to ask your question?
Oh, yes. Hi. Good evening. So my question is, you mentioned that there are many Urushi centers across Japan. I'm just curious, from a collection point of view, are there certain regions that are more well known to collectors than others, or it really depends on the objective or the type of objects being created? Thank you.
Well, thank you. It's a very good question. First of all, on our website, if you go on our website there's a button called research, and you can see all 43 centers of Urushi with an example of what is done, a map of where it's made, and an English and Japanese explanation. So that's something it's taken us a long time to create. We have about 1,000 now crafts which are represented in that way. So for collectors, most people don't collect functional wear. I mean, some people do, but in terms of collections, those would be artists, and the artists are mainly living, for the most part, maybe 80% or more are living in either Kyoto, Kanazawa, or Tokyo. The artisans who are making functional wear are living all over the country in mostly those 43 areas, but also maybe 15% are living in other areas as well. So it's all over the place.
Steve, just to kind of build on that, with ceramics, you talked about how each region has some pigments or colors or techniques or maybe kilns or something that distinguish them from each other. Is there a similar kind of history or production quality to urushi ware that varies by each region because of the materials that people find in that region and so on?
Well, I think maybe not so much the materials found, because to some extent, the kinds of wood that are available. But remember, most of these urushi districts were developed during the Edo period, when feudal lords were trying to increase the prosperity of their district, and they would encourage people to do certain crafts. So there was a proliferation of crafts all over Japan. This was really a true gold, in the international sense, a true golden age of craftsmanship, where it just blossomed. And remember, Edo period was a time when there were no wars, so there were a lot of samurai foot soldiers who needed some kind of income, and so they had lots of people and lots of demand. So, but if you look on our website, if you go and you look at each technique, they're really very different. You have what's done in Aomori with I gave an example of the burnishing technique with the different blobs of color, which you push back on, you burnish back on. In Wajima is very refined, very beautiful, very refined techniques using makie gold. Kyoto has its own techniques. And there's some crossover, but each area has its own personality, which is pretty amazing. And there's an area in Shikoku, in the Takamatsu district, which they do some of these very highly refined Chinese techniques to this day.
Great. Maria Sakaguchi has a good reference question. Maria, do you want to ask your question to Steve?
Maybe it's me, Mana Sakaguchi.
Yes. Oh, sorry, I misread it.
No, it's okay. Yeah, I was wondering if you have any recommendation for resources or books that might give us a deeper look into history of Urushi, from like Jomon period to now, including like all the different uh influences from different countries.
Nothing, there's no one book that comes to mind. I've over the years, I've just accessed many different sources. I'm sure there must be a wonderful composite of everything someplace. Maybe you and I should be writing it together.
I don't know if anybody on the call is familiar with any resource guides or works, put them in the chat, and maybe that's another way to share any information you have about this art. Somebody had asked about the apprentice aspects of this. Can Polly Lauser, are you still on the call? Do you want to ask your question about kind of the training period?
Hi, yes, thank you. This was a fabulous presentation. Thank you so much. I actually was curious because this does take a long time to learn. How are these people, can you speak about how they are supported during this period of time? Is this something that your group is helping with? And I know that somebody else asked if the government was helping with this. Can you speak a little bit to how they're compensated or supported during this period?
So this is one of the big problems. You're pointing a very large problem. That traditionally, a young person would go to a craftsperson, an established craftsperson who had a considerable income to support an apprentice, and they would live with the artist, the craftsperson, and eventually they would be part of their staff. And that system has really pretty much fallen apart. There are very, very few people who still do that. So you have the people who I was showing just now are all university trained people. They didn't, for the most part, there may be a couple exceptions. For the most part, they were university trained, and they started out as artists and not craftspeople. So they put in many, many years of work on their own, as all artists do, with no compensation. And they became successful. Of course, for each successful person, there are hundreds of people that never make it. For the craftspeople who make functional ware in those 43 districts, it's very difficult to get young people to come to those positions because there's no compensation. They have to find a way to live, for 6-7 years before they can actually make money. And because of the dropping in sales, the craftspeople themselves can't afford to support them. So in our organization, we're in a very small way, and not yet with Urushi, but we support the people, the craftspeople. We have an example of one of our dyers, a young man in his mid-30s, very talented, but he couldn't get work as a dyer. So he was driving a dump truck, and he could only train a few hours a week because he was working he has to live. So we paid for his room and board. But for the most part, it's very difficult. And the government does a lot, but there's so much to be done in their local governments. And, it's whatever's being done isn't working.
Mm.
It just has, it is, I mean, it's working in some ways, but we are trying our approach to see if that works. And, the jury is still out on all of us, but it's things I think are starting to get a little bit better, but there's no one answer to your question, unfortunately.
Well, thank you for the work that you are doing towards this. It's remarkably important.
But just so you know, that all of, we support now we have funding for about 15 craft apprentices for this year, and we're currently funding 8, and all those come from our members. It's all privately funded. So the good news about Japan is that with the dollar now being so high, it's easy to support a Japanese apprentice because the dollar is worth so much. So we are able to support all those people. But yeah, thank you for your kindness. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, I think that's maybe a good place to draw the formal program to a close. And I think, Steve, if you're available to hang on after we kind of wrap up the program, people can kind of chat with you a little bit more. If you've got some questions that weren't
Sure.
answered, people have some things that they've thought of that they would like to bring up. We can make Steve available for a little bit longer. But let me just thank you again for your sharing your wonderful expertise and insight into these the world of Japanese crafts. And I think everybody who attended today, I'm sure, learned something about Urushi lacquerware that they didn't know before and gained new appreciation for what goes into some of these crafts, as well as some of the threats that they're faced by because of the economic pressures and changes in tastes and things like that. And it is really amazing work that JapanCraft21 is doing to help build awareness, not just in Japan, but internationally, and to raise money and support for artisans who continue to pursue some of these crafts. And so I would like to just encourage folks as well, if you are interested in this area, sign up for Steve's on Steve's website. You can make donations to them as a charitable organization through their website and other things. And please support the work that he's doing, because it really goes to an important cause that I think is certainly one of the aspects that brings many of us to appreciate our visits and time in Japan. So thank you, Steve, for all the work that you're doing on that.
Thank you. Thank you for giving us this opportunity.
Well, we hope to plan more. In fact, we were just talking about when our next program is going to be. We don't have a date set for that, but we hope to do more programs in the future with Steve and JapanCraft21. And as I mentioned, in addition to our arts and culture programs, we have a lot of other things that Japan Society of Northern California is doing. And each of the Japan societies in many different regions, including those that helped sponsor and promote our event today in Colorado, Oregon, Washington, D.C., and Hawaii, who helped promote our event today, are also doing a lot of activities and programs in their local regions. And so we hope that you can support their activities and programs as well. So let me wrap up now with the formal part of the program and thank everybody for attending. Thank you, Steve and Keiko and Yoko, for sharing your expertise and passion with us about Urushi Lacquerware. And we will turn off the recording and let people stay a little bit longer if they want to chat with Steve and the team and ask further questions about this area. So thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Steve.
Building bridges between the United States and Japan since 1905. Japan Society.